Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time Studios in post-hurricane Florida. The Space Coast is doing fine, and down the coast as well. My friend Kurt Wuckert Jr. is also in Florida. You can see the waves behind him. Kurt, welcome.
Yes.
Welcome back to the studios. How are you?
I'm quite well. Anything that doesn't kill you only makes you stronger, so I'm getting stronger fast.
There you go. And if for those who did not know, Kurt was on somewhat kind of embedded hostile territory, dangerous, violent war criminal trial duty in the last couple of weeks, not, as one might suppose, in Kabul or somewhere interesting like Donbass, but in fact in the hotbed of hostility known as Oslo in Norway.
Yeah,
and,
the war zone you never heard of. Yeah.
Well, and what was the approach to that? It was a trial that Craig was going through, right?
So the short version is there's a character named Hodlonaut, goes by that's his alias anyways, and the fact that anyone uses his name, Magnus Granath, is an affront to everyone's rights everywhere, everyone's privacy. It's a human rights violation.
So if I say Hodlonaut, Magnus something, I'm violating his rights?
If you remind people that his name is Magnus Granath, you're violating his rights.
Magnus Granath, you say, is Hodlonaut, yes. And I apparently am violating his rights thereby. Got it. Check. Yes. Okay.
However, the largest financial magazine in Norway published his photo and said his name many times, congratulating him for being the new account manager for Blockstream at a giant investment group called CT. So apparently, if you're paying him lots of money to work with the small block or BTC people, you can call him Magnus Granath and publish his photo all day and you will not be punished for it. Wow. However, if you're me and you republish his tweets and use his name, apparently you are open cannon fodder for the entirety of their cultural revolution over there.
Wow. And the entirety of that cultural revolution, that's how many Norwegians with tinfoil lining their hats? Or
it's probably only a few dozen small block of people in Norway. Norway is actually quite a small country anyways. I think they only have about 5 million people in the whole country. So I'm from a city that probably has more people in it. So that's an interesting dichotomy there. But they've got a very interesting Bitcoin culture. The original Bitcoin meetup in Oslo has become a BSV meetup over the years, sort of organically. They still meet in the same place and same time, sans the coronavirus stuff, which put a hamper on everybody's meetup schedules. But they still hang out, they still meet up. And when I went there, there was a BSV meetup group that, when I said, hey, can we all meet up? We got about 10 people to sort of cycle through and come out for beers pretty casually. They've got startups going on and everything else. So the pretty nice, small but healthy organic culture there over in the BSV space. But
and so for those who are my listeners who are not quite aware yet of the difference between Bitcoin as you see BTC on TV and BSV, which is Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, might it be a stretch to say that changing of the group in Norway would be akin to replacing BTC with BSV in the Norway meetup would be like replacing the Aztec death altars with the Roman Catholic Church? Is that a fair?
Something like that, yeah. So in a lot of places, I know a lot of people that used to host Bitcoin meetups 6 or 7 years ago. So this is in the sort of 2013 to 2017 era, when there was a major cultural split that was split permanently in 2017 between big blockers and small blockers. Small blockers, for brief overview, small blockers became buy, hodl, get rich, be super toxic and defend your bags. The big blockers say, hey, Bitcoin was supposed to be used for all kinds of things other than investment, like please let's focus on business related utility and other things, plus the fact that it's a scarce asset that might be desirable, that kind of thing. So as a big blocker, the BSV community is what appeals to me. And the small blockers hate me for it. So
that's delightful. So it's good to be hated for the things that are right to be hated for. And for my listeners who don't quite get it, big and small block refer to a block is the kind of amount of data size that it's allowed to fit onto the chain next to provide compelling information to move the chain along to kind of its next ownership state or its next,
correct.
Right.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so
How much data are you willing to reconcile in a 10-minute period? And that is such a political issue that it's worth destroying each other's lives over, apparently.
It is, and it's fascinating because when you came on the show, and I went from not being unaware of the existence of this distinction to being converted to an orthodox big blocker in under 45 minutes. Again, kudos to you. But yeah, it made all the sense in the world to me. So I can see that, of course, if you are fighting the small block corner, it's like fighting any other leftist cause where you have to treat it as a religion because it's existential to everything you want to get done, even though it makes no sense.
Yep. No, and I make allusions to that all the time, and it makes them so mad when I point out that they're just using left-wing social engineering tactics. Like this is community organizer stuff. Like if you read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, like this is crystal, like the way that you gaslight people and put them into little groups and then, you know, crucify them as a collective. Like this is all very, very sort of, it is the playbook of the new left, which at this point is, 50 years old, but yeah, but
they're showing their temper tantrum in their aging boomer lives.
Correct. It's the authoritarian left, and it's their tactics, and they get utilized, and it really ticks them off because they fancy themselves as fundamentally libertarians. And I just look at it and say, like, what part of your worldview is libertarian? Like, you guys are authoritarian bullies. You do nothing but harm people who disagree with you.
It is fascinating just to step away from in the exactly analogous space in the current political. We have the midterms coming up in 30 days. I just happen to be, obviously I'm fairly involved with Republican Party governance and some races here and there, depending if I know people in the state. And so I've been talking to some friends in Pennsylvania who are like, this lunatic Fetterman is like a poster boy for what's wrong in our nation. He's this trust fund brat who's never done anything in his entire life but become a drug addict and then, get praised for not being a drug addict. Walks around with a hoodie like an overgrown 13-year-old and has failed to show up to any event for weeks. He's just hoping that hiding, like the Joe Biden strategy, hiding and saying nothing. And so in the context of all that, I roared with laughter when I saw him on Twitter today doing exactly what the left does, which is calling out the right falsely for what they are doing. And he's like, whoa, Dr. Oz, show up anywhere. Like, wow, like the brazenness. That kind of was like, okay, you get that in politics going back in the 1930s, right?
Sure.
We have this weird thing called the internet now, where people record your every movement when you were doing something like running for Senate in a state. Like, Oz has been a nonstop motion machine every day for weeks because he's, I don't know, running for Senate. So, like, the bizarre, degree of pure lying gaslighting is so weird. But maybe it works. No. I mean, they keep trying it, so presumably they think it works.
Well, and it's, I don't even want to make it necessarily about a left-right paradigm, but like it's there's so much rhetoric about even just like what is a good idea. Like everything has to come through a political lens first today. And like, I was actually speaking to some attorneys from the UK earlier today. And we were just talking about like the differences between UK and American law. Because one of them actually has practiced in both places. And he looked at it and he was like, oh man, he's like, UK law is so like there is no politicization of the law in the UK. And he's like, but in the US, like if you're going to go into a trial at any level, the first thing you do is look for the political affiliation of the judge.
Right.
And then you try to tailor your demographic, like your entire case is tailored to like, was my judge appointed by a Democrat or a Republican? And that's going to be the defining characteristic of the entire way that my case is litigated. And like, I don't know what the rest of the world is like, frankly, but the deeply political nature of probably. But the political nature of everything makes it that like, we shouldn't be unable to communicate simply because of the differences in our worldview. But it's what it's become, and it's really, I mean, it's just, even just from a pure utilitarian standpoint, it's just going to make us unproductive.
Oh, it has.
But
I mean, it's
yeah,
absolutely terrifying. But I recall that, years ago we were working on a big um, intellectual property rights case on Wall Street, a bunch of banks, and I was part of the team helping, one of the sides, and we had these phenomenal attorneys who are very good litigators. And I never forget this guy, because you've got a bunch of high-powered Wall Street MDs who are like, they want an answer, right? And so they're asking this attorney who is calm as a lake, right? Like nothing's going to bug him, which is what you want in a trial attorney, right? And so guys who are used to being in their own businesses, being listened to with fear, right, are pestering him like, well, what do you tell me about, what are our chances on this case? He looked at me and said, look, I've been a litigator for 25 years. On a good day, I'm 97% sure I'm alive. And it was so perfect, because he's like, I can get a judge who is like a closet Marxist who hid his entire opinions before he went before the Senate subcommittee to get his seat. Like, no idea. This is Wall Street fighting Wall Street. So in theory, it should be neutral, because even the most ardent anti-Wall Streeter will get to hurt one of us, right? So predictably, maybe they'll argue on the merits. Who knows? But like, if you run into a judge who's got a, a priori political bias that believes that things like profit is evil, like, you're dead walking in, and your entire goal is to set this trial up so you are able to appeal. Which is nuts, which does not happen in the UK. It does not.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, and that's the kind of stuff that he was going into, like that, and just looking at the way that people treat essentially everything. And it's a similar thing with Bitcoin, like you get people that are talking about, something that is a rule-based system. Like it's funny. I draw this analogy all the time. Is like the U.S. Constitution and the Bitcoin white paper. And it's like, they're different documents in that one is legal and one is more philosophical, or philosophical and academic, but they do similar things, and they actually suss out your worldview really well. Like if you look at the U.S. Constitution and say, it's old, like, okay, you're a liberal. And then, but if you look at it and say, well, this is the foundation of the law, and therefore it has weight in the society until it is, overthrown in some way, like, okay, you're a conservative. And like, it's very much the same way with Bitcoin. Like, I'll bring up the white paper as an authoritative document on the definitions of what is a Bitcoin, and people look at me, oh, you put like, you so silly, so you are so cute, like
we changed that. That's awesome. It's really funny, because in the last few weeks, having gone from when all this began, right? I was there I saw, early on, I heard about it when it's still 8 cents a shot, a coin. And I never, it fundamentally, from the very beginning, I've gone on record as saying that this is all fundamentally valueless. Like if there's utility to it, the utility that the system carries is where the value is, right?
Yeah.
Excel in and of itself is useless. If my Excel sheet is used to define the structured commodity product that I use to define in a legal contract with my counterparty, well, now the Excel has been a very powerful tool to enable us to analyze, and that's obviously a simple example. But and so watching all these people on TV go on and they've got learned and the chartists and the support levels and the all this crap forever. And I'm like, this is magic, because there's nothing more than a magical incantation that your court sorcerer would use to stave off the invading army or the locust blight from your land. It's nonsense. They're all fundamentally valueless. And of course, I've got a lot of heat and screaming for that, because I just expressed that opinion to other Wall Streeters, which it seems self-evident to them. I got into no trouble for it. Whereas if you're online talking to people who actually care about this deeply, and you are literally goring their sacred and very profitable ox, they tend to get very upset, because the more people that poke holes in the illusion, the faster it's going to go.
well, right. Which is why, over the last few, I mean, just increasingly over the last year, frankly, but it's accelerated over the last month, where people like me who sort of criticize the status quo and the sort of paper empires that have been built are all of a sudden targeted more and more. And it's starting to feel like, and it's funny because the ways I've been targeted, like a lot of the information that's being used against me is observably false information,
Right.
but it gets its own legs by the fact that people assume that it's real.
Sure.
To where even if I comment, like for example, the Celsius, which is sort of an exchange and an investment program, or some other things, but they've gone bankrupt this year, and now
deservedly so.
Absolutely, I mean, they
were that bankruptcy 110%.
naked Ponzi scheme. Yeah, it was just crazy. Well, I had an account over there, and so everyone, like when the data dumped as to who were the creditors,
right?
Well, I'm on the list, and it's funny because I had what I assumed was $5 or $10 there because I opened an account to test out the platform. I'm a journalist in the blockchain space, and therefore, so I do things like this. I have an account basically everywhere, and so the BTC Bitcoin holdings that I had over there, I think I probably received as a dividend, but it uses the exponential figure. So it was 0.000058 exponential dash 60 is what I think that it said on the thing.
Right.
But the way that the scraper software treated it as if I had 5.8 BTC, which is $100 and something thousand.
Right.
And so now live on the internet, Kurt lost over 100 grand in Celsius. What an idiot.
Right.
And that's the thing that's got legs now. And I'm just like, does anyone did anyone actually look? No, of course not. Like the headline has gone out and I'm the fool, and it's like, and now the fact that if I were to backpedal or, make it, well, here's all the reasons, now I look like I'm trying to cover something up, right? It's like, oh my God, is this how the media is created? This is how you create villains?
For years. But remember,
it's amazing.
I've been caught in stuff like that too. And the hardest thing in the world is to remember what LBJ was one of our most effective bare knuckle street fighting politicians ever, right? That's how he became president, because he had, there's absolutely no way on earth he would have otherwise. But his great line was, if you're explaining, you're losing.
100%.
You can't get involved. And the greatest one was when he said they wanted, he was telling his campaign manager basically that they were going to spread the rumor that his opponent liked to have sex with pigs. and his campaign manager, and they're sitting around like, no one's going to believe that. He said, of course no one's going to believe it. I just want to hear him deny it.
Sure.
Right?
No, it's
so
brilliant.
When you call the big fucker, the best you can do is if someone shows a camera in your mouth, is go sue and move on, because there's just no point in arguing, because the story is funnier, and any response, as you say, is proof it's true.
Yeah. No, it's funny. No, it's such a bizarre thing. It's so bizarre to see just the manipulation tactics. Because I mean, you observe the news casually. I don't even watch the news anymore. I used to be a big political junkie, and it was I was in my 20s and I'm gonna have a stroke. This is ridiculous. So,
but what you're experiencing, think about it. What you're experiencing is the culmination right now for the entire Trump family of what I call January 6th, the musical, still playing in DC, right?
Yeah.
The entire premise of these morons started with a lie written by Christopher Steele and Hillary Clinton. They co-wrote a bestseller that's just so ridiculous.
Yeah.
And all they wanted to get was the fact that if anyone in the FBI were to take the dossier and look at it, journalists could then report that the government was investigating it. That was the entire goal. They never in their wildest dreams imagined half of Congress would believe this nonsense. But look at what the Trumps have gone through for 7 years now over a complete fabrication, the authors of which have suffered no consequences.
Yep. No, I'm too tuned out to know, but so here's one from back what I remember. So I used to, like, I was a political science major. I wanted to be a strategist. I actually worked on a couple of campaigns
Ooh,
as like a low level, like was a volunteer guy, like in my early
ouch.
20s, like I'm going to work my way up and
Pamphlets.
like knew I hate it here. But
You all suck. None of you
yeah,
should be
it
allowed
really
to
was.
hold
No,
office.
20, like 21, 22 years old was like, nope, I'm never voting. It might be a sin to vote. So
Exactly. I'm sure it is. Anyone that can get on the ballot is by definition not
yes.
qualified to lead the country.
Yeah, no, just terrible. But the thing that I remember, because I used to follow it very closely, is that the what do they call it now? Was it the I don't know what the movement was called, but people saying that Barack Obama was born in Kenya and therefore is not an
Oh,
American
yeah.
citizen.
Yeah, the birthers. Right.
The birther movement.
Fabulous.
Everybody blames Donald Trump for
Right.
popularizing that, which he did popularize it.
Yeah.
However, it was none of his research. Every bit of research that he ever put out came from the Hillary Clinton campaign.
Oh, of course.
Because when she was running against him to be the Democratic nominee, so in the Democratic primary, she paid people to dig into whether or not he was eligible to be president.
Yep.
And then after she lost the primary, that information just kind of pilfered out. But then it got picked up by the Trump people who were obviously looking for an angle against whoever. And they're like, well, there's a lot of compelling information here, actually. But him putting it out, it was, oh, well, this is just an absurd racist conspiracy theory. And it's like, from the Hillary Clinton camp. So
I loved the birther nonsense because the first time I heard of it, right? And Obama was already president, right? So picture this. I am working in Paris for a Middle Eastern country that's building a new exchange. So think about it. But the point is, I'm not sitting on American soil. I'm sitting in an office in Paris, and my office mate happens to be a guy I respect a whole lot. Like, if he's hearing this, right, he'll laugh. I like him a lot. He's an American, right? And from Boston, really smart guy, very different background. And we're sitting there, and because it's just the two of us in the office, and the picture comes across the news of the first family, he goes, he's not even American. And you had those moments in life where you're like, wow, I'm sitting in a room with a complete crazy person. And I looked at him, I said, excuse me? He's like, well, I wasn't born in America, you know that? And like, again, my brain is spinning at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I'm like, I don't even know how to respond to this. This is a guy I've gotten to know for like 3 months, who I think is a pretty bright, intelligent person. Right? And he then goes on with this whole thing about, Kenya and blah, blah, blah. And I remember my first reaction, I just looked at him and said, I'm going to get back to you on that. I'm like, give a little thought to this. He's like, you haven't heard this? No, I haven't heard this. No, I have not heard this. And then I thought about it. And I thought, remember, I've lived in Africa, right? So I know in, like, say, now, what a colossal pain in the ass it is if I'm sitting in Gaborone to get to New York. It's not easy. It takes a while, right? So after about an hour of working on something else, I got a cup of coffee, and my response to him then is the only response I ever give anyone now. Let me get this right. Your theory is that a hippie white woman anthropologist who is busy in living in Africa gets pregnant, and while she's pregnant thinks, this kid born of an unmarried American mother, he's going to be the first black president. I better get out of here. I better get on a plane. And so I said, you might have had me if you told me that Barack was born in the arrivals lounge at Logan Airport. Like, maybe, but no, she had presence of mind to not only get to America in 1950, whatever, but then fly all the way to Hawaii to fake this birth.
Where the records are kept poorly. Yeah.
What are we talking about? Like that? That's your theory? Why not just say you hate the guy as a communist and a moron? All that's true. Like, but like, what? Why make this up? And that was my reaction then, and it hasn't changed. Like.
Yeah.
Of all the implausible lies, if you told me he'd been born at JFK or Logan or any East Coast airport,
right?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Sure. It's funny. So I mean, I grew up in Chicago. So for me, like, grew up in Chicago, and in the early 2000s was super into politics and trying to get my way into, like, hey, do I want to be a political something? And So I remember when Barack Obama was just like plucky South Side, alderman or whatever he was, and then he was a state senator, and yeah, he was a bunch of things. But I actually met him like before he was known outside of like the city and the state, like because he would go do events and he'd be at ribbon cuttings and whatever.
Yep.
And so like it's funny because he always was such a chameleon too. Like I never liked him because he was, cameras on, like, hey, how's it going? Like he was Mr. Cool Guy. And then like the second it was on, he was the first guy like out, like cameras are off, bye.
Yeah.
And other people at the very, especially at that level, like aldermen, like, dude, you're not that cool. Like you're in charge of like a neighborhood. And so, but but he just always kind of had that air of just self-importance, that kind of thing. But it's funny because studying him and the crew around him was a lot that got me into studying the social engineering tactics of the New Left. A lot of that comes from Chicago specifically.
Oh yeah.
So there's like the Bill Ayers and who are the I mean it literally was all University of Chicago people. It was South Side, primarily white, hardcore leftists. Like they were hardcore communists.
And he lied and denied his entire presidency that he even knew them. I kind of met him once. Bill Ayers and Jacqueline Dorn had him in their home constantly.
Yes, Dorn. That was the other one. Yeah,
correct.
They were neighbors. They were next door neighbors.
Yes, a domestic terrorist who, if his really, really rich daddy had not bought him freedom.
Yep.
The course of history would have been different. If Bill Ayers had been just a middle-class kid, he would have languished in jail for the SDS bombings.
Oh, for sure.
But Daddy was a really, really rich insurance executive from Winnetka up in North Chicago, and he bought him out of trouble. And I know this because I know one of the guys he grew up to high school with, right? Yeah. Who knows this prick intimately. I mean, the damage they did. The best thing the University of Illinois ever did, which is a big statement, but when it came time for those
nuclear warheads,
the University of Chicago did that.
That was the University of Chicago. You're right. Okay.
Illinois at Chicago.
Yes, you're right.
Where both Bill and Jacqueline taught, gave their propaganda crap to generations of children. Is that when enough parents found out these commie pricks have been indoctrinating their children for decades, and they protested to the UIC Board of Regents. They were both stripped of their pensions when they left the university. I mean, what that takes to take away pension for a professor, but they're like, you evil commie lying terrorist sleaze who basically have lied to us from day one, get out. If I could put you in jail, I wouldn't. I can't. So just get out, and you're not getting another penny.
Right.
The damage they have done has been epic, absolutely epic. But that's old Chicago insanity. So what right now, coming out of the Magnus Granath Hodlonaut trial in Oslo, what was the upshot of that? And is there going to be a ruling soon? Because it was a big defamation case, right?
The ruling is in November. I think the judge went on vacation basically the day after the trial, and she said normally it'd be 2 weeks. Normally it would be 2 weeks for the verdict, but that ain't gonna happen. I'll see you in November.
No, I got some fishing to do. I gotta go.
Yeah, pretty much. So it was interesting. Like the case itself was, is it political speech to organize Craig Wright as a fraud week with your pretty big Twitter account? Like, maybe. I mean, there was the argument that they made. Versus
political, he's not running for anything. He's not a public official.
Well, and that was the argument that Craig's side made, right? That he's not a public figure by default. He was outed, and therefore people know who he is. But like, sorry, he didn't ask for any of this. And so, I thought it was really interesting that Granath's side took the position of, yes, he is a bully. The culture of bullying is good. This is the thing that, like they specifically said, like, being a rabid, toxic Bitcoin maximalist is a cornerstone of the culture that we should uphold. So
it sounds like a disease. It doesn't sound like a culture.
Yes. Well, and to which Craig's attorney gets up and says, because the culture is toxic, this is not an indication that everyone should become toxic and follow it. And he's like, I don't want to be the guy to bring up Nazi Germany, but this was the argument that they made. And so So court got, that spicy pretty quick.
Wow,
And
that's awesome.
yeah, and but in such a conservative, like Norway is so low volatility in the amount of like emotion and all of that they push out. So
they are not, for those of my listeners, they are not New York Sicilian Jews.
Correct. Yes. And so I mean, like the lowest doldrum and the highest highs were literally like, to an American, right?
Notice, right?
Yeah, no wavelength.
Right.
So,
something the judge barely raised a voice, and everyone, ooh.
Exactly. No, it was like and it's funny because there were a couple Americans that were reporting it, and we were saying the same. We're out in the hallway, just like, is this as weird to you as it is to me? Like, yeah, no, this is super
weird. They all
weird.
seem to think that was dramatic. I mean, that seemed like he was asking for a new cucumber sandwich, and could you please cut the crust up?
Exactly. Well, and it's funny too because the judge would be like, hey, order, and I'm just like,
like, we're in America, like, bailiff, tie him to the chair,
right?
Put tape on his face.
Man, I have had a bailiff hit the front of my chair with his nightstick because I was like slouching. Like it's such a different vibe in American court. But like, so the interesting thing is they basically doubled down on the like, Craig Wright is a fraud. Craig Wright is not just a fraud, but like a piece of crap person. Like he's all these other things. And like to call him out is fundamentally good. And we stand by it 100%. And like, okay, so that's your position,
Bizarre position.
It was bold to say the least.
What a creative defense.
Yeah. I mean,
is there an objective standard by which they judge humanity is a piece of shit or not? Do they have a sliding shit scale upon which? Well, I assume I'm sitting comfortably with Craig on the piece of shit scale in their minds. so
that's the interesting thing is that in a place like Norway, their freedom of speech is a little bit different than expected in places like the U.S. too. And so, the argument made from Craig's attorneys was like, this could be in Norway a borderline hate crime actually, and. Sure. And so I'm sitting there thinking like, man, like how much trouble could he be in if he's found guilty of this, and so it was a curiosity to then pull up his other tweets. And so they pulled up and they're like, well, let's talk about his toxicity and his rabid whatever. And it was everything from like, yeah, of course, Chinese people were involved. The whole place smelled like MSG. And then like, and things like, or bring up, he had a Holocaust denial tweet where he's just like, well, sure, I'd account for it, but it's illegal for me to even bring it up in most of the nations in the EU. And, so he's just like, he's always poking this line of like, sort of, vaguely fascist, and then he's vaguely communist, and then this is pretty close to being racist here. And like, but then consistently across the board, like, so prick.
Culturally a colossal asshole.
Yes.
That's his defense. I'm a cultural asshole, and therefore this is all good.
Yes, but owning it, like fully owning it, just like this is good. Like, what are we, soft people? It was like,
would this guy do this in person, or is he one of these really brave, keyboard warriors who would never dare say this to someone's face in a bar?
That's hard to say. I don't know. He's a guy that he's covered in like, he's a big Norwegian guy, like blonde hair, white guy, your classic, what you'd expect, like, nice shirt over sweater, like right. what an American would typically call overdressed, but this is his casual day. But like,
but he's a hoodlum by Oslo standards.
Yes. And it's funny because that's what his attorneys put it as. It's like, well, he's kind of a hooligan, and this is the I'm like, this guy's a hooligan, but like, but
he looks like an Upper East Side preppy, but
right,
he looks like a hooligan.
Well, but then here's the other thing: is he's a grade school teacher by trade. So grade school teacher by trade, advocating that, well, if the guy's an autistic, whatever, and he's wrong, of course it's okay to bully him. Just like, what's the code of ethics of a school teacher in this country? So like,
that's killer.
Yeah.
So that was his demeanor the whole trial. I saw.
Oh yeah, he was literally laughing and snickering at Craig's witnesses, like. they'd be out there like, oh yeah, I've known Craig since 2006, and yeah, he introduced me to Bitcoin, and you know, like I saw an old version of the white paper, and he's just like, like making like bizarre, jokey, like the kind of faces you'd expect out of a teenager in sex ed, like while his friend has to like recite the genitalia, and it's like, you're just like, I'm like, who is this freaking guy? It just was amazing.
I'm going to make a footnote here that I've got a short story in my head, the title of which is now Recite the Genitalia. I just think that is a title that needs to have at least a short story put to it, if not a haiku. Yes. Anyway, because I too, at heart, am a 13-year-old. So
yes.
Well, that's really weird. And did the judge in this austere courtroom setting censor him for acting like a twit and making faces at people?
Not that I noticed, and there was a little bit of like, so the trial was primarily in Norwegian, so I don't know. Yeah. And it's funny because everybody spoke perfect English, because when any person who had to speak needed to switch to like reading a quote or something, they switched to like flawless English. And I'm just like, right. And it's like
Scandinavian speaks far more perfectly grammatical English than
no, it was beautiful. Yeah. So, with their lovely accents too. But so I'm listening to a translator, which was a little rough, a little hard for me to pick up on, timbre and context, a little bit, because
it's impossible to translate. You can only gloss. So it's always
right. So I kind of don't know. I tried to pick up a little bit on, how the judge was reacting and some things, but it's my own inference, and it's really hard to read and whatever. So, I think the interesting thing, she seemed a lot more interested in Craig as a person, because like we got to hear both parties on the stand. And so it was this guy talking about like, I don't know. I did some IT and whatever. I don't even know what that means. Like, just kind of whatever. It's just a very, in a basic sense, a normal guy you'd meet at a bar kind of guy, and then you get to Craig and it's like, well, yeah, I have, 17 postgraduate degrees, and I'm the most highly credentialed cybersecurity person in the Eastern Hemisphere. And, and I built the entire Vodafone network across, Australia and Asia, which was itself the fastest network on Earth at the time. And yes, I designed it from scratch. Yes, I did it on pen and paper, that kind of thing, so it's like, you're hearing like this other person. So she's just sitting there listening like, okay. Yes. And like, and yes, I consult, like, yes, I worked for US intelligence, and yes, I helped design this and that. Yes, I did. But, so it's just all these things like, okay. So it's like one guy is, the level of Thomas Edison, and the angry school teacher down the street doesn't like him,
So weird.
It was a really weird one. And then all of Craig's witnesses, I thought it was really interesting too, that Craig's witnesses were all character witnesses. So Granath brought in all expert witnesses. So it was all, here's all the reasons why, from a cryptographic standpoint, Craig could not be Satoshi. Right. And it was funny because the one guy was brought in to analyze a specific blog post that had a lot of cryptography in it, but the subject matter of the post was about Jean-Paul Sartre, who like the French, frankly, French creep, but famous
I think he developed lounging around smoking gitans in cafes looking for young boys, if I recall correctly.
Something to that effect.
That was what he was famous for. I think he wrote a couple of things too, but they turned out to be frivolous.
he was a notable pedophilia advocate and some other things.
Now, be careful. We are in the Nancy Pelosi's America, and he is a minor attracted person.
Correct. Minor attracted person. And not even necessarily a minor attracted person. He was an advocate for the rights of minor attracted people.
Well, that's fascinating. So in some ways, for pedophilia, one might say he would be equivalent to Hodlonaut, otherwise known as Magnus
Granath.
Oh, Magnus! See, I got it wrong. I wouldn't want to call Magnus Granath Marcus Granath. Sorry. Anyway,
totally different.
Marcus out there might find me and be angry. But anyway, go on.
So here's the interesting thing about this post. So Craig wrote this post in 2016 using Jean-Paul Sartre as a character, as the subject of a blog post. And the other thing that a lot of people don't know about Jean-Paul Sartre is that he did not want to claim his Nobel Prize, because if he claimed his Nobel Prize, the thing that he would be remembered for is, here's Nobel Prize winner Jean-Paul Sartre. And he did not want that to be his reputation.
Noted pederast.
Yeah. He had nothing he wanted glossed over with Nobel Peace Prize winner. So, good on him, I guess. But
that's pure to the end. I love that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, no, he was committed. And
committed. He was deep into it. All right.
So here's the interesting thing. So Craig uses this analogy consistently throughout this post, but what the post is about is why certain aspects of your identity are not what people want them to be. And so he was using it as a circuitous example about why, if he proves he's Satoshi in the ways people want him to, that it disallows him from accomplishing his grander goals. But then the way that he shows the example cryptographically is also a quote about Jean-Paul Sartre. So it kind of keeps going back and forth with this thing. So it's like nice. It's like a riddle and an analogy wrapped into a broader lesson about not just the cryptography, but like, what is identity? What does it mean to be known as a name? And that kind of thing. Really, really deep stuff. Other people would say it's techno babble of some lying prick. But if you appreciate it for what it is, it's very
intelligently done. I remember sitting in a graduate philosophy class at the University of Chicago, and one grad student that thought he was going to be very clever. I think we were going on and on about Wittgenstein versus Kant, about something regarding moral imperatives. Don't recall. But the point of it was this basically just clever enough to get into a Chicago grad school seminar. Clown thought he was going to make a big point and said to the professor, "I'm sorry, but isn't this all just mental masturbation?" And the professor turned to him and looked and said, "Have you come yet?"
Oh man, he was probably sitting on that one for years too.
Oh boy, it was priceless. Magic. Ooh, bam, right back, right back into his seat. Shut up, son.
That's awesome.
So about the pederast focused philosophical discourse with cryptography. Back to that.
And so we're in court, and the expert that was brought in to explain the nature of proving your identity with cryptography and why this example was invalid. So he's going into all these reasons, like, well, your key, it would be very simple. If you controlled the private keys, it would only require X. This would be a 30-second thing. And like, he's going and going. So here's the obvious reasons why Craig Wright is a fraud and this and that. And it's funny because what he's doing is he's actually explaining the riddle within the blog post and doesn't realize it.
Right.
And Craig's attorney, he says, what was the document that Craig used? What's the significance of the document that Craig used for the cryptographic signature? And he says, what do you mean? I don't understand the question.
Right.
And he's like, did you read the thing that's used to generate the key pair? And he said, yeah, I think I did. And he's like, what's it about? And he's like, I don't really know. Like, so you could tell he was, and then he kind of backpedaled. And he's like, well, I remember reading it in 2016 when it came out, and I just thought it was gobbledygook. He
focused on the cryptography technical piece of it. He wasn't paying
exactly. He didn't really read it for what it was. Right. And then the final question he says is, do you know who Jean-Paul Sartre is? And he says, no.
Magic.
No further questions. It's just like, oh man. And so it just was beautiful. Like, it was such a like I don't even think he understood that he got dunked on, but he literally,
that's even better. That's wonderful. He didn't even know that he just got slammed.
That's wonderful. And so like, and I'm there live tweeting, and I'm just like, exclamation points, like, oh my God, like this is, and it's funny because the people that were reporting for like Bitcoin Magazine and some of these other people, like I checked what they're writing. They're just like, oh man, this was such a good segment for Granath's side. And I'm like,
fascinating.
No, like all of you guys missed the entire point. Like Craig made fun of you in 2016 and you still don't get it.
Still don't get it. Oh, that's wonderful.
It was so funny. But yeah, it was fascinating. But But that really is like a defining moment for like how the whole trial really played out. Is it's like you bring in some guy who purports to be an expert and has a very simple reason why. Well, here's why Craig isn't qualified. But then on Craig's side, it was literally bring in like, well, here's the head of network deployment for the largest telecom company in Australia. And how long have you known Craig Wright? Well, since 5 years before the Bitcoin white paper came out. Okay, is Craig Wright qualified? Well, not only is Craig Wright qualified, he may be the most qualified man alive. It's like, well, do you have the credential to validate like that Craig is that kind of person? It's like, well, yes, I'm in charge of hiring the greatest network engineers in the Eastern Hemisphere. Like, we built, we built everything, and we had Craig build it. And when he built it, it was the
best thing ever.
It was it. Yeah. And so, and it wasn't just one witness like that. I think he had 6 or 7 character witnesses that were like, oh, yes, I was the head of cyber forensics at BDO, and Craig was my best guy, period. Yeah. And then it was, who else was it? I was Australian military intelligence working on, like, we basically developed all this crazy hardware and software and all this stuff. He happened to also be Craig's cousin, but he was like, yes, we did all this stuff. And he's like, yes, I'm good at all this. He's like, Craig is
phenomenal.
Like, I can't even understand the things that Craig solves. And so, like, yeah, so it was like just a whole other class. Essentially, everybody's saying, like, not only is Craig an incredible character, like, the other side isn't even intelligent enough to quantify what they're up against.
You know what I love about that? And this is it's because it's been an honor to get to know a bunch of folks in this community, you and Joshua, and spend time with Craig at lunch with him. Like, he's going to work on some stuff, hopefully. But like that, I've always liked working with real high performers, right? Who bring a complementary skill set that I don't have, because that's helpful, right? I don't need another one of me. No one does. But it's always so refreshing to work with people who are deep domain experts in what they're talking about, and that came up recently. Funnily enough, in the critical mineral space, where I spend, where I spend my time, where I actually feed myself, where one of the investment bankers were working with this great meeting, and he said, we had what you thought was going to be the best possible pitch possible, right? If you're an investment bank, your entire goal is to raise money for people, collect a big fee, they go off and become incredibly rich, and you just become mildly rich. Great, but that's great. That's what you chose to do. And this team had identified, like, this brilliant team in a metals recycling space. I won't go more. But in general, as you said, the problem we didn't conceive of was we went out to the market with the smartest team possible, which sounds great, right? But every investor, to do due diligence, has to go hire consultants to vet what they've done. Well, if you already have the smartest team, who are they hiring? Not the smartest team. And it takes someone really, 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 really intellectually honest and confident in themselves to say to an investor who's hired them, to the limits of my knowledge, what these guys are saying is true. I'm not qualified to judge the innovation they have claimed they've made, because I really don't understand it. Human nature, especially expert human nature with PhDs attached to it, doesn't like saying that, so they don't say that. So most consultants who are hired to examine investments tend to say no in very elegant ways with colorful PowerPoints, so they look smart, right? Yeah. That was our headache. We had the best team. How do you get investors to invest in the best team? Because they literally cannot understand what these guys are saying. Right. And that occurs to me when I deal with folks like Craig and others, is that either you listen carefully to what they have to say about the technical problem, and, like, we've done this in the exchange space and other places, and you're like, that sounds reasonable. I guess we're going to wager a few $1 million on building it. Let's see what happens, right? Because you can't vet it. And so if Hodlonaut, the school teacher who likes to be bitter online because he's a weird person, like it's like one of these clowns who spends their time talking about how there's no way we went to the moon. It was all done on a Hollywood set, right? Just you can't talk to them because they make no sense because they're not defending an intellectual proposition. They're defending something existential to the core of their belief system, which is really, really hard to say no to.
Yep.
Weird. Well, that was fascinating.
And it's funny because I always use that analogy too, is that it's a religious thing. Like your position on Bitcoin is a lot like your position on it's like asking like an Orthodox Christian, Jew, and Muslim, who is God? And like,
I know this one.
Right. Like you can get infinite amounts of scholarship as to why each of them are right and why each of them are wrong. And thousands of years worth of documentation and everything else. It's like, have we answered the question? And exactly. You just know. Like
the occasional dust up.
Well,
I hear.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because it's like, okay, so does that really matter? Because here's the thing, like seriously Orthodox Christians, Muslims, and Jews can be friends and do business together, and like
all day long.
You may not go to the same religious ceremony, and maybe you sing different songs, and if the Christian guy is grilling, you got to let him know what not to grill. But at the end of the day, like we're all people. We actually agree a lot more than we disagree. And if we focus on the things that we hate about each other, like sure, we're all capable of causing a whole lot of chaos. But but it's so young in the Bitcoin space. I imagine it's a lot what it's like from like the era of the early church and things. It's like, well, you're just a cult, and it's like,
it was the life of Brian.
Yes,
the followers of the shoe versus the followers of the gourd.
Exactly right. No, 100%.
Yep.
And truly, we're small bands of very passionate, but ultimately, nascent, budding groups of, ideas that have yet to truly be pressure tested.
Yep.
Like we could all be wrong. And it's funny because I've said this a couple times to people who are like, let's bring in Kurt. He's this big Bitcoin advocate. I'm like, Kurt, what do you think is the biggest threat? And I'm like, well, the biggest threat is that we're all wrong. We're all crazy. And we're all wasting our time.
Which is true just in general.
Right. Yeah.
I will say that I think it's rare that I come across a theologically dispositive discussion, which kind of lays a lot of this to rest at a very base level. And that happened last night at the 11 p.m. Eastern Time airing of Rick and Morty, where if you haven't seen it, I'm going to have to say spoiler alert. In the episode, the dinosaurs come back.
Okay.
They've been out traveling, fixing the galaxy. And they've come back and they find out the first thing when all these humans show up, the President of the United States and all these people are there, and they said, when did the monkeys lose their hair? So that was fun. Now I will urge my listeners to go dive into the deep philosophical implications of the dinosaurs' return. But suffice to say, it put to rest all of humanity's theological disputations and kind of shelved them as being irrelevant.
No, it shows so good because it's so crucial to have a sense of humor, and this was the real thing. So in court, I'm this enemy to these people, but for me, I keep trying to offer, like, I went and introduced myself to the journalists on the other side, like, hey guys, I know we believe different things. If you guys want to go have lunch or something, like, I'd love to sit and, hey, we can talk about anything other than Bitcoin if you like, or whatever. And like, I could tell it made them very uncomfortable. And then, I tried to actually.
My listeners will be fascinated to find out there are journalistic sides to this. That's fascinating. Yes. Actually,
yes,
crackers. Just like that's crackers.
Yeah. So we, and that was okay. Mixed results. I actually, realized one of them had some humanity and had a couple of good discussions over the like 10 days that I was in town. And then, but like, Granath, for example, like on their best day, I think the day that they did really well, they had KPMG did a bunch of reports on a bunch of stuff. I think they presented themselves really well. Like they had their absolute best day. And I reached out to shake his hand in the meeting area after to say, hey, good job today.
Good
like
job,
that was
right?
a and he like laughed in my face and pulled his hand like no, like shook his head and just like, all right.
Okay.
That's fine. So so the vitriol that was seated there for whatever reason, and then has followed me home, frankly. We've been under cyber attack nonstop. We've had DOS attacks against my businesses. We've had my personal information leaked, all kinds of personal financial information, my home address, photos of my wife, threats of all kinds of other awful things have been sent via DM, like all this stuff because I had the audacity to go report on this case, and this presumption that I'm some kind of puppet, like they see me as like a Joseph Goebbels sort of character in the Craig Wright evil empire. Is it like,
That is fascinating.
Yeah, and I'm just like I just am reporting what I see. Like I have a view.
An incredibly unlikely Hitler.
Yes.
I mean, really.
Yeah, no, it's
he doesn't really seem to want to control anyone, shove people in ovens. Last I checked, he created a protocol that would enable radical financial inclusivity for the poorest people on the planet. So you can actually make a micropayment to 4 cents. Unlike at Visa, that would cost you $2.54 to do.
Right.
But with BSV, it would cost you 4 cents.
Pretty much. No, and
wow,
it's just
what a radical, awful guy. And how dare you propagandize for him?
Yeah. So it's been real bad. And it's funny, like the thing that I'm known, like my catch line or my tagline that I use is be good to each other. I say it to close essentially every stream that I do, And so I've got people sending me threats in my DMs and finishing it with be good to each other, right? Ha 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 ha. And I'm just like,
so weird,
bro. What?
Like, how much of that? I'm curious. Like, how much of that rises to the level of screen scraping forward to the FBI? I mean, there's a limit to what you can do in this world.
Oh, I mean, I keep logs of everything. Logs, like, I mean, whether it goes that far or not, whatever. But yeah, it's just I don't know. To me, it indicates, first of all, it indicates fear. Like that's the kind of thing that like. Sure. I would never approach unless I felt like I was in like imminent, like, how do I threaten my adversaries into submission? It's like, well, I've never thought that thought because I'm not worried.
In a Marvel comic and you're their nemesis. Do they picture you in your lair plotting and cackling over the demise of BTC?
I think so. I think they think of me as like the toady to a supervillain. I think that's what it is.
Wow.
I am a lackey. Like I'm the cannon fodder in like 20 minutes before the movie's over. Like the superhero gets me first, and then the rest of the movie is about getting the big bad guy.
Right.
So yeah.
Huh. I'm trying to figure out where I might fit into this arcane vision. But I mean, I guess if I'm gonna be in the multiverse, I'd like to be someone's arch nemesis. I mean, I'd hate to play a supporting role, but I guess I'll take what I get.
Yeah, I mean, depending on how big the expanded universe gets, there's room for you.
There's room. That's very exciting.
Yeah,
maybe not quite Goebbels, but maybe sort of a Goering role.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of branches of the military. So
yeah, well, yeah, there really are. Yeah. Well, anyway. Well, thank you. I mean, that's just fascinating. I mean, I was curious about, and people had heard briefly about this sort of Craig Wright case in Norway, and you were there, so I kind of wanted to touch on it. Aside from that, or maybe for another day, I mean, is there anything sort of more interestingly sort of technical developing that we're seeing aside from what Binance today, lost like $100 million because someone created fake coins and siphoned them? I mean, a lot of these ills. Am I wrong in assuming are because the deviation from the Bitcoin original protocol?
Oh, for sure.
Has been such a mess that you can create these ridiculous situations.
Yeah.
Basically, create $500 million out of thin air, take 20% of it, and then nothing. Then nothing happens.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. That's a great example that a protocol like the Binance Smart Chain is really just a fork of Ethereum. Ethereum is very deeply and fundamentally different than Bitcoin in that its security model is more complex and more complex and less robust.
Usually the two go
Less
together.
robust, yeah.
Right.
And so especially when you're going to do a multi-chain world where it's like, okay, I need to swap my Ether for Binance Smart Coin or just whatever, and pick your token of choice. So then there need to be bridges in order for those bridges to be secure. It's like anybody that understands like how networks and computers work, it's your connection points that are your weakest links.
Right.
And so
that's where all the attacks happen, right on those bridges, because
Yep.
if you're good enough, and a lot of that's kind of off the shelf crap that your basic script kiddie can get off the dark web.
Oh yeah.
It's not complicated.
Yep. Well, they're not even, most of it, like just like everything else, most of it is social engineering. You're not actually even hacking the network itself.
Right.
You're spear phishing. You're trying to get people like, hey, claim your tokens. They're worth $10,000. Like you get 10 grand if you click this link. And then it's okay. Now I've inserted malware into your MetaMask wallet. Now
Right.
I'm noodling my way into your stuff. And then you just rip off who you're going to rip off. So I think that things like that are continuing to be a development in the blockchain space. The big thing in the BSV space that was announced was the they call it the what do they call it? The digital asset recovery tool system.
Oh, right, where you can actually freeze and blacklist and pull back.
Smart. Correct. So
right.
Different functions, but broken into a few different functions, like alert that coins may or may not have been stolen, freeze coins so that if somebody tries to use them, they're frozen at the
Yep.
the network level,
Yep.
and then potentially reassign them using a script function in Bitcoin. Everyone's up and that isn't how any of this works. And like, well, actually,
what I find so insane about that is the functionality that we built into my mind's Critical Minerals NFT offering, right? And that is what made investors comfortable, because real world investors that I talk to, who are interested in mining products, who think, in their words, Christopher, this crypto thing is nonsense, right? But if you tell me if there's reality here, I'll do it. Their biggest concern was, I don't know anything about this, and I read constantly that people who are in this space get ripped off in an afternoon for $1 billion. What's to prevent that from happening? So, well, the beautiful part is our entire structure is it comes back through my firm. So I will,
right.
If your thing gets stolen and I haven't certified the transfer, I'm just going to freeze it. Yep. I'm not going to allow it. I'm going to reissue it to you. I'm not going to honor theirs. And so when I saw this announcement, I'm like, that didn't exist before. I mean, that's basic. My investors aren't touching it without that functionality existing.
Oh, for sure. Well, and that's the interesting thing, is that there's a big difference between possession and ownership. But the Bitcoin people, or the small blocker Bitcoin people, they conflate the two and they use them interchangeably. And that's bonkers. And so the real crazy part of it is that, Bitcoin is a great tool for crime if you can obfuscate your transaction history, and if nobody can steal back what you stole, and without doing police work and kicking your door in. And so the curious thing is that the original Bitcoin protocol actually had the ability for nodes to just do a script function and move coins out of one wallet to another if you were a node operator. Now, if the other nodes disagreed with what you did, you'd fork off and you'd be on your own separate network, which was innately unvaluable, rather.
Right.
And so that was like the governance model there. But of course, there was, in 2009, collusion to steal people's coins, because this is how people were at the time. It was an immature network, and people were sort of testing what it could do. And so if you could collude with the other 6 people on the network, oh, cool, I can rob everybody. So Satoshi
when the end is very small, it's very easy to steal.
Yes. And so, it was like smothering the baby in the bassinet. It was like, cool, I'm a tough guy. It's like, no, not really.
No, you smothered a baby. That wasn't really impressive.
Right. And so Satoshi shut off that functionality and never talked about it. He never said a thing about what, and people call it a bug. They're like, oh, it's the one return bug in Bitcoin. And Satoshi shut it off because it was a bug. And it's like, it was a very, very simple script function. Like, this was not at the end of a long line of like, well, if you can segregate the nodes and do a, like, it wasn't an attack. It was oh, like op one, op true, op return, add in the hash and just move it.
Right.
Go. Oh, it worked. It's like,
Right.
oh, okay. So like, where was the room for that to be a bug? And then Satoshi also created the alert key, which was a way in 2010 for Bitcoin nodes to be able to receive direct messages for coordination purposes. And this was from 2010 to I think it was 16. This tool existed. And there was constant debate about, should we shut off the alert key? Should we turn it on? Who has the alert key ability? Like, who could do, like, is it too much power? Is it all these things? Because, we need to be very decentralized. But like, Satoshi created these two tools. And what can one do as the creator of the protocol with the ability to coordinate all nodes? And if all nodes can move coins from any address to any other address, like, so it's a really interesting thing that it's a restoration of the protocol, but people are saying like, oh no, it was a bug. And this is just Craig trying to rip people off and, get rid of Bitcoin's primary function is that nobody can steal your coins. It's not your keys, not your coins is like a mantra that they have tattooed across their throat, And so
we're all the good gangsters have stuff done.
Correct. Yeah.
Let here is mad nuts.
Let them know your affiliations.
Exactly.
So
this only comes off when I do time. Then everyone steps back.
Yeah. Right. Grow a beard for a while. Yeah. So but it's funny because it's a worldview thing, right? Like somebody like you hear that and you're like, oh, cool. Like you can arbitrate and trust your trusted third party to reassign something where either someone has made a mistake or committed a crime. Like that's great. This is a good thing. And a Bitcoiner looks at it and they're just like, that's it. It's over. Like we don't have our anarchist crime money anymore. And so
what a shame.
Yeah. And it's like, I get it. Like that is an appealing thing about Bitcoin in a very simple context of like, maybe I'm a refugee trying to get out of North Korea. And the only way I can come up with $1,000 that they can't steal from me is to have my private keys. And like, it's very romantic. And in that case.
Yep.
But how many times is that case occurring compared to how many times the like just basic social engineering and cybercrime, like, hey, we hacked your computer and we've got your nudes and pay me $5,000 for them, or they're going on Reddit, and it's like, well, that happens all the damn time.
Well, they're already on Reddit and I got downvoted, so go ahead.
Right. Yeah. No one was impressed anyways. Right. Yeah. So like,
so you'd be off for I think it was violations of aesthetic sensibility. I don't know. It was very, very obscure.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You get the Florida white guy, like you're way too tan on your right. You get the right.
That can't be a subreddit. No. Bring back the leprosy.
Yes. And so it's funny because there's been a lot of pushback, obviously, from the BTC people, but there's a significant amount of pushback in the BSV space too. And like, because a lot of people have come to it as, a sort of libertarian, it's anti-government money. And then these kind of things are the presumption that a lot of people come to Bitcoin with. And so then we've got like, this stuff going on with like Russia and Ukraine, and like a BSV wallet turned off service to Russia because the EU demanded like, you're not allowed to provide financial services to Russia. And so this wallet provider's like, sorry, if your IP address is in Russia, we're not serving your data. And and then people are, oh my God, you made the political decision to censor Russian citizens. Like,
no, I just follow the law of my country.
Yes, right. And it's like, what? Like, I'm going to go to war for the the 50 people in Russia that are using my wallet? Like, no, absolutely not. And so,
if you really care, here's the laptop. I urge you to fly to Cyprus and do it from there. Right. I don't care that much.
But so you're starting to get a view of what the culture is, though, and which is why like people are comfortable with, well, we need to attack Kurt because he's gone against the tribe, and like that's
I kind of get it, but it's also in that sense, it all strikes me as a bit of very childish kind of dorm room bull session antics, right?
Oh, it's super
people on this planet who are really separated from governments and don't care what they have to say. They're not on social media having opinions. They are already separated from governments and doing what they want to do. and trying to approach them physically ends with you physically dying, right? Like, so this semi-dramatic keyboard warrior game is just that, right? And it reminds me of this conversation I had years ago with this guy, nice guy, right? He had also fairly, libertarian sort of leanings, but was telling me about the fact that he had, a lot of, gold and silver bars in his own possession. And he wasn't like a lot of the guys I deal with, ex-military and really dangerous. And he was just a nebbishy guy, lived in the New Jersey suburbs and didn't own any firearms. I was like, could you just note that address down for me again? And do you have any cute daughters? Like, if the revolution comes, that shit's mine. Or someone else's. Like, and it's only mine because I'm smart enough to hook up with a bunch of really dangerous people to come get it from you. But like, if this all collapses, you, my friend, need to start doing a lot more push-ups before, because that gold and the silver is now an attractant. It's not a defense.
Yeah, exactly.
That attracts me very, very similarly. It's posturing from a position of extreme comfort without admitting that's what they're doing.
No, it's exactly what it is, and they're trying to intimidate and everything else. But I mean, they like that. It's the people that are saying, like, our toxicity and our rabidity is a corner. It is what keeps the culture pure. And I'm just like, not the way.
I remember that because I read. I'm not going to give them any more fame, but I do recall, because being a textual originalist from Chicago, right? When I first heard about these alt-right morons, I went and read before they, all this was prior to Charlottesville, where all this stuff was still up, right, on the internet. And I went and read this manifesto by one of the clowns who eventually apparently found it very hard to find. He's slippery. He skated away. Ironically enough, he's hiding in Africa, which I find hilarious. If they ever read any of his stuff, maybe they've already gutted him. But I remember reading it, and I'm like, all he's saying is people don't understand the alt-right culture. And he's explaining it. And it's like, I'm a loser hiding in my mommy's basement. I can't meet attractive women. I'm too much of a socially awkward dork to get a job. And I'm going to sit here and rage online. That's our culture. And I'm like, you just told the world you're a loser.
Right.
It's not hard to understand. I mean, it's very easy to understand. You're Peppy the Frog crap, all this nonsense. Like, you just said, I'm a loser. And the only way I can get any satisfaction in my life is to attack people through multiple VPNs so they can't find out who I am and be mean to them on Twitter. So, okay, now I understand you, quote unquote, culture. Wow, that's the saddest thing I've ever read.
Yeah. No, and it is. And truly, I think that's what almost all of it is. Like, these are people, these are the kids that were bullied in school. It's your typical, like, beta male, math and science, computer nerd kind of guy, which, somebody I can sympathize with. I'm not criticizing, but imagine that person, who, like, never had a girlfriend growing up, like, just all of these kind of things. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I'm a pretty high level hacker. Like, I'm pretty good at getting information on things. Like, I can now have a valuable career that can get me pretty wealthy. I got into Bitcoin early. Now I'm a multi-millionaire. And like,
but I get to create, know how to talk to a girl at a bar.
Well, yes, but they can create the pseudonymous identity where I'm a tough guy. This is where I'm a tough guy. And like, so that's like this big part of what I think is actually going on is I mean, I couldn't punch you in the face, but I can DDoS your business offline, and like, I can lose you money and blah, blah, blah. And like, it's the same thing. It's the same as the jock at the lunch table who walks up and slaps your meal off the table and says, do something, and like, and like, so, I mean, like, I kind of get it from like a pure, psychoanalysis standpoint, but it's such a, like, I mean, I wouldn't have liked the jock in high school, just like I don't like the computer bully today. Like, I was not that guy. I think they call them Sigma males. So where you're sort of a lone wolf, but like, you're cool to hang out with anybody. And I'm kind of a rugged individual, kind of like philosophically, but I'm also 6'3" and an MMA fighter. And, like hey, if the
Slightly
captain of the
differentiated from the tribe.
yeah, like wrestled my whole life. Like if the captain of the football team wanted to kick my ass, I would have, put his teeth down his throat and walked away. But like at the same time, I'm also
It's
like
good to have balance.
I was an IT professional as well,
Right.
So it's like I'm very comfortable in both worlds and also comfortable not being in either of them. But like, so for me, I'm like exactly the wrong guy to understand everybody's weird psychology and all
no
that.
Sense at all. Do you remember? And we'll head off and we'll set up another time. This is fascinating. But I remember John Foster Dulles and when they were setting up the original OSS that then became the CIA.
Yep.
When he was asked for the ideal candidate, he said, "I need math PhDs who can win a bar fight." Right? That's what I need. Go. I need a PhD that can win a bar fight.
Yeah.
Because I don't need brains and I don't need brawn. I got plenty of that everywhere.
Yeah.
I need both.
Yeah. No, it's hard. They do exist though.
Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah.
That's true. But Kurt, fascinating. Thank you for coming on and I didn't know that I had to say thank you for being so brave as to cover a
me neither.
Defamation trial in Oslo. I mean, woo, yeah. Who knew that was Hazard Bay?
Yeah.
But hopefully it's all bluster online and none of it turns into material reality. Yeah. And again, any final words for my listeners who are trying to get smarter on this space?
I think don't trust anybody, but give everybody a chance. Like, be good to each other. Like that nobody's actually an expert. If you want to learn about Bitcoin, start under the presumption that everyone who wants to give you advice has a conflict of interest and they probably don't know what they're talking about.
Except for Bitcoin 101 on CoinGeek. The life
correct. We do our best.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. Well, until next time, everybody, please be sure to save yourselves the brain pain. Turn off the mainstream media who are lying to you on the daily, and be sure to tune into Messy Times. Until next time, ciao.
Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.